The law of the Lord is perfect, refreshing the soul. Psalm 19:7. Really? Didn't they have anything else to do? I mean, desire is a good thing, but I guess what the psalmist is saying, that when we desire things more than we desire God, that's when it gets us into trouble. That's when we lose our freedom. And then we jump into this emotional roller coaster of life because God isn't at the center and our soul doesn't rest in God's grace. So how do we move forward in life when our perceptions in Christianity, well, it's what takes away our freedom. And yet, for those of us who embrace it, finding that as we rest ourselves in God, that's when we find our greatest freedom. We can affirm our belief in Jesus as the Son of the living God. I mean, we can accept His gifts of forgiveness and salvation, but retain our freedom to decide for ourselves how we should live. How is it that the law revives the soul? I mean, it seems more like the law oppresses the soul. What is the connection of law and soul? You look at the Ten Commandments, we're not designed to be a standalone list of do's and don'ts. Rather, they come with a relational context. They describe what living up to a certain value and a certain identity and a certain destiny looks like. I mean, the Ten Commandments flow out of how we are designed, how we were meant to be. That's why we don't so much break them as we break ourselves when we violate them. Really, what we find is obedience to God increases our freedom. What we know about freedom is it really comes in two flavors, according to Ortberg in his book. And one is a freedom from external constraints. It's kind of a freedom from. But then there's another flavor of freedom. It's freedom for. Freedom to become the person that we are intended to be. Freedom for living with purpose and meaning and grace. So the question we ask is, are we living in a freedom from something, or are we living in a freedom for something? I mean, we really want freedom from constraints, but your freedom gets limited by kind of internal reality of what is a kind of brokenness or weakness or dividedness inside you. Maybe you want to stop drinking, but you can't. You want to live with a happy, cheerful, optimistic attitude, but you don't. You want to quit yelling at your kids, but you fail. You want to be a kind person who manages anger really, really well, but you aren't. You like to think you have become unselfish, but you haven't. You are not free. The freedom you lack is an internal freedom. This inner lack of freedom is much more dehumanizing, much more tragic than external constraints. The kind of freedom is internal, and it is precious. It is soul freedom. Remember, the soul is what integrates our parts, our will, our mind, our body. If our will is enslaved to our appetites, if our thoughts are obsessed with unfulfilled desires, if our emotions are slaves to our circumstances, if our bodily habits contradict our professed values, the soul is not free. The only way for the soul to be free is for all our parts of our personhood to be rightly ordered. When Nelson Mandela was imprisoned by captors, he did not have very much freedom from. He certainly was constrained. But there was a freedom inside him that was much greater than what the guards had. The deeper freedom, the freedom that the soul needs, is the freedom for becoming the person I was designed to be. Finding freedom comes from a dependence on God's grace and embracing God's overall design for the world and your place in it. God's law leads to soul freedom. The psalmist writes, I will always obey your law forever and ever. And then the next verse, I will walk about in freedom, for I have sought out your precepts. Freedom. James writes about it. Whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting where they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. To understand how sin begins to enslave our souls, you just have to see that when sin becomes a habit, we might have moments of gossip or moments that we cheat or lie. But when they become habits, they start to enslave our souls. We lose our freedom. Now you can have good habits of kindness and patience and goodness, the kinds of things of the fruit of the Spirit of God that's at work in us. Those habits are good too. But what we find is that even our willpower to not gossip or be unkind or not lie or be deceptive at work, habits still take over. When sin becomes a habit, our souls lose their freedom. And you can override a habit with willpower for a moment or two. You can go to church, read the Bible, worship, sing, pray. You feel at peace with God for a moment, and then the sin habit returns. Habits eat willpower for breakfast, according to Ortberg. Our only hope is not willpower, but a new set of habits. And it's more than mere effort. Education, environment, therapy, those are helpful, but they don't cure the problem. Our brokenness, like ours, is very complex. Wounds and scars and disappointment. And really begins with a surrender to God who gives the soul freedom. And we'll look at that next, as the soul needs to find its freedom through satisfaction.